They call me a traitor. Let me sit with that for a second because I want you to really hear what happened. I've been called a traitor not by Paul Kagame's propagandist, not by M23 apologist, not by Rwanda's diplomatic corps, not by the Western think tankers who still can't even find Goma on a map. The same one that can't even name Rwanda and call them backers. I was called a traitor by people who call themselves Congolese patriots, by people who wave the blue and yellow red flag, by the people who claim to love the Congo the way I love the Congo. My crime? I criticized Félix Tshisekedi. President Félix Tshisekedi, God forbid I forget to use that term. And that's it. That's the full extent of my treason. I had the audacity, the sheer unforgivable audacity to say out loud, what millions of Congolese people whisper in private. And for that, I was shut out of panels, uninvited from conversations, refused to be answered to, had my credibility attacked. Some of them actually call me Rwandan, which is not an insult per se, but other call me Burundian. Other folks call me Ugandan. I was told in so many words that to criticize the men in Kinshasa while Kagame's forces occupy the eastern Congo is the same as siding with the enemy. No, and let me be very clear about something this evening or this afternoon. It's 2 p.m. Eastern Time. This morning, if you're watching from the Pacific Northwest, because this episode is going to go to places that make a lot of people uncomfortable, and that's okay. Because that discomfort is exactly the point. Critiquing Felix Tshisekedi is not a betrayal of the Congo. I do believe that shielding him from accountability is, and not just Felix Tshisekedi, but the entire political class. And that's today the, I would say, episode, the indictment. So, welcome to Congo Unfiltered, because today, together, we are going to file the indictment. Before I get into the substance of today's episode, this evening episodes, depending on where you're watching this from, I need to address something structural, something that goes to the very heart of the political discourse, works in our community, in the Congolese community, because it directly affects or explains why what I'm about to say tonight or this evening has been suppressed, ridiculed, and weaponized against people like me. Right? So there is an unspoken contract that operates in most diaspora and civil society spaces when it comes to the DRC. That the contract goes something like this. As long as Rwanda is the enemy, and Rwanda is the enemy, I want to be crystal clear. The occupation of the Congo, the North Kivu, part of South Kivu, by Rwandan forces, the RDF, and the M23 proxy is a war crime, right? And a violation of Congolese sovereignty in every conceivable legal and moral sense. As long as Rwanda is the enemy, because that's the point I was trying to make, the contract says that we must not speak ill of Kinshasa, the Tshisekedi's regime, the Congolese government, that we must not complicate the narrative. We must not give the ammunition to the other side, right? And it sounds reasonable on its face. And then you really sit down a second and you think about it, and you realize that it is one of the most dangerous intellectual framework that exists in Congolese political life. And I know that people before me, my elders at Friends of the Congo, my elders in this struggle for free Congo, were also attacked. Also, so the problematic in that contract, because here's why. Because that contract does not protect the Congolese people. It protects the Congolese political class. It protects the bourgeoisie. It protects the elites. It protects the people in Kinshasa, the capital, who have turned catastrophe into a business model. It protects those who have figured out that as long as Kagame exists, as long as Paul Kagame exists, as long as Rwanda is illegally occupying the Congo, consistently invading the Congo, as long as the eastern part of the Congo is burning, as long as the multinational and Western countries are somehow fueling the war, that they, meaning the political class, the Congolese political class, will never be held accountable for a single dollar that they have stolen, a single contract they have rigged, a single election they have manipulated, or like we've seen recently, a single drone they have fired into a crowd. But the logic, right? Don't criticize Tshisekedi during wartime is the logic that every African leader who has ever used a genuine external threats to immunize themselves from internal, right, internal scrutiny has relied upon. And if I only stay in the case of the Congo, because we are talking about the Congo, it's Congo Unfiltered. The dictator Mobutu, Joseph Mobutu, he did it, 32 years in power. Kabila, the father, before getting assassinated, he did it. His son, who took over and led the country for 18 years, he did it too. And now President Tshisekedi is doing it. And the tragedy here is the deep tragedy is that many of us in the diaspora, many of us who consider ourselves advocates for the Congolese people, friends of the Congo, we have become enforcers of that silence. Not because we are corrupt, not because we are complicit, but because we have allowed our legitimate fury at Rwanda in this particular moment to blind us to the rot that is also consuming the Congo from the inside. And I refuse this contract. I refuse this contract. And tonight, I'm tearing it up on here. And I think we should all do that. Because we need to understand the forces at play. And at Friends of the Congo, we are clear about the crisis in the Congo, the four-dimensional crisis in the Congo, who are behind the 30-year, and I would even go deeper, 140 years of exploitation, of subjugation of the Congolese people. And I'm going to focus on one of them, the Congolese political class led by President Tshisekedi today. So let's start by the beginning. Let's start by the beginning because context matters. Félix Tshisekedi did not arrive at the presidency the way his father did, through decades of sacrifice. Well, he tried, right? He tried through decades of sacrifice, prison, exile, and genuine political struggle. Because his father, Etienne Tshisekedi wa Mulumba, was a titan for so many. And whatever his flaws, and he had a lot of them, the man paid a price for his convictions, for what he believed in. Because he was arrested, he was beaten, he was exiled. We cannot take that away from him. He built a UDPS from the ground up as a genuine opposition force against Mobutu and then against the Kabilas. Félix Tshisekedi, you see, inherited that name. He inherited the brand. He inherited the base. And he leveraged every bit of it to ascend to a power that he almost certainly did not win at the ballot. To run, he actually presented a fake diploma from Belgium, pretending to have studied a field that never existed in that university. Look it up. So let's talk about that 2018 election, because the Catholic Church at that time deployed 40,000 election observers. 40,000. And when patriots, true patriots, saw the overwhelming majority voting for one man, but also saw that what was being published, what was going to be published, was going to be the opposite. They decided to leak the data from the Electoral National Commission. Because that council, the data that they leaked, showed that Martin Fayulu was the clear winner of the 2018 election. The irony here is that the man that was leading the Electoral Commission at that time, that proclaimed Félix Tshisekedi as the winner, as the president, is Corneille Nangaa, who is now the political face of the AFC, or if you want, the M23. He's the one who declared Tshisekedi the winner. And Nangaa himself has since admitted that Tshisekedi came to power through what he called a Republican deal. He came to power through what the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, Jean-Yves Le Drian, called the African Compromise. In plain language, a backroom arrangement with Joseph Kabila. The United States Treasury Department had already sanctioned Nangaa in 2019, I believe, 2020, over his management of those elections, the corruption, how he used the the Congolese fund, the Electoral National Commission fund, before he defected to the rebel side. Because we all know it's an occupation. So Tshisekedi began his presidency as the main beneficiary of a stolen election. And that's the fact, and that's history. And that is not like a polemical statement. That is what the Catholic Church, 40,000 observers documented. And that is what Nanga himself has since confirmed it. And he said in a press conference that he created a monster. I'm not going to dissect how somebody who created a monster willingly suddenly is becoming the solution. But today, the indictment is against Félix Tshisekedi and his regime and the entire political class of the Congo. So Tshisekedi arrived to the Palais de la Nation, which is the equivalence, I guess, to the White House. Not by the will of the Congolese people who should have elected him, but by the grace of the man who he would subsequently spend years trying to destroy, Joseph Kabila, recently sentenced to death on alleged presence in Goma because when he was stripped away from his immunity, he hadn't set his foot in Goma yet. He hasn't openly said that he's part of the M23, but he was sentenced to death, a former president alive, in a country that is still struggling to put his peace together, to get peace, to even have sovereignty. Now, I'm not defending Kabila. Kabila's crime, and he has committed many of them, are their own chapter, their own indictment, and perhaps their own episode of this very show. But again, today is the indictment of Félix Tshisekedi and his regime. But what I'm saying is that the moral foundation of Tshisekedi's presidency was compromised from the first day. And that's very important for people to understand that. And rather than spending his first term earning the legitimacy that was denied at the ballot box by, of course, delivering for the Congolese people healthcare, getting them out of poverty, employment, decent roads, and everything that would better the lives of the Congolese people. He did the opposite. Instead of leading the country by redistributing the wealth of the great and rich Congo, he governed as though the throne was his birthright, and anyone who questioned him was an enemy of the state. Go check out the last report of Human Rights Watch, talking about the people only in Kinshasa that keep disappearing because of criticizing Tshisekedi, because of exercising the free speech. They haven't even taken weapons to find themselves in prison. They haven't joined any rebellion, any rebel group. They haven't crossed to Rwanda, but they found themselves in jail for speaking up peacefully. So by 2023, the second election was even worse. 9 opposition presidential candidates, including Martin Fayulu, the rightful winner of the 2018 election, Moise Katumbi, who came second in the 2023 election, and Dr. Denis Mukwege, 2018 Nobel Peace Prize. They all publicly called the election a sham and asked supporters to take the streets. International observers note serious irregularities. Of course, the African Union was muted like always. They were muted in 2018 because it's a club of dictators, I guess. And Tshisekedi was declared the winner again. Meanwhile, the civil society organization across the country, they documented manipulation, voter intimidation, logistical failures so severe that some polling stations simply never opened. Other electronic machines or voting machines were found in the houses of those close to President Tshisekedi. Some polling stations were kept open weeks after they were supposed to be closed, or the election was supposed to end, or the voting process. So when we talk about President Tshisekedi, because we have to call him President Tshisekedi, when we talk about his regime, we got to be precise about what we mean, because we are talking about a government that was born in an electoral fraud and has built every subsequent year of its existence on a foundation it never legitimized through performance, transparency, or a genuine accountability to the people it claims to represent. And that is where we shall begin. Now let us talk about what happened once the Tshisekedi government was in place, because the silent contract that I described earlier has allowed an extraordinary catalog of corruption to accumulate with almost no sustained public reckoning. That's the problem. And I want to go through it carefully because the number matter. The numbers matter. The names matter. And I want every person listening to this episode to be armed with the facts. And I probably won't be able to name all of them, but I want people to be aware. So let's start with Vital Kamerhe, who's now being silent. He was the Speaker of the National Assembly for a long time, the third highest position in the country. But before that, he was President Tshisekedi chief of staff. And he's also a convicted criminal, talking about convicted felon in the US. In 2020, during COVID, when the entire world was shut down due to a pandemic that shook the world, in the Congo, the president chief of staff was being convicted of embezzlements and sentenced to 20 years of forced labor. The crime, the misappropriation of approximately $49 million intended for a government housing program, and many more. He served a portion of that sentence and had it reduced on an appeal. And by 2024, he was not only free, but had returned to the very center of political power as an elected Speaker of Parliament. So think about that. A man convicted of stealing tens of millions of dollars from a public housing program for a country where more than 60% of the population lives on less than $2.15 a day. That man was later presiding over the national legislature. Think about it as a Speaker of the House. And the president, Tshisekedi, who campaigned on fighting corruption, preside over this rehabilitation of a convicted felon. And this is not by accident. This is the architecture of a system in which power protects power. Every system is designed to achieve the result it gets. In the case of the Congo, for 140 years, that system has been designed to protect those in power. Another example is Vidya Chimanga that people probably forgot. In September 2022, an investigation by the Swiss newspaper Le Temps, in partnership with organized crime and corruption reporting projects, OCCRP, published leaked video footage that rocked Kinshasa. On those videos, you can see Mr. Chimanga, who was at that time Tshisekedi's own special strategic advisor, was caught on camera offering unlimited access to the DRC's minerals resources, of course, in exchange for bribery. And those briberies included personal shares in companies and direct kickbacks. The shocking part is that those videos were explicit and they went viral. Tshisekedi's response at that time, he showed Chimangas initially protected his closest ally, at least until the political pressure became possible to ignore. Impossible to ignore, I mean. So Chimanga eventually faced a token prosecution. 3 years was a recommendation from the prosecutor. But I think, and for those who are watching, following the case, the message had already been sent to anyone that the president's cycle or circle operates with impunity. And the machinery of accountability only moves when the optics become unbearable. The third name I'm going to throw out there is Nicolas Kazadi, the former finance minister, a close confidant of Tshisekedi, linked to a multi-million dollar investment scandal as well. And what happened to him? He quietly left the country in June 2024, I believe. And the arrangement reportedly facilitated from the president office, and he traveled to France. So there hasn't been any arrest warrant, no prosecution. His case has remained dormant until today. He actually said in an interview that whenever they receive $1 million, and I'm literally verbatim quoting what he said in that interview, he said that when they get funding from the World Bank, from the IMF for projects to reduce poverty, they distribute the money among themselves first, and then they're going to think about the project and how they can implement the rest. I'm paraphrasing, I would say. So while millions of Congolese have no access to healthcare, while teachers go unpaid, while soldiers in the East fight without adequate supply, the finance minister of the Congo at that time until today takes a comfortable exit to Europe. And no one is held responsible. Then there is the case of Constant Mutamba, the former Minister of Justice. Let me say that again. The Minister of Justice, the man charged with upholding the rule of law in the Congo. Mutamba was forced to resign after the National Assembly authorized the Attorney General to initiate legal proceeding against him for the alleged embezzlement of $39 million intended for the construction of prison. One prison in Kisangani, $39 million for a prison. Gone. Like that. And the fact that it took this long and required full act of the National Assembly just to initiate the proceedings against a sitting minister tells you everything you need to know about how accountability functions, or rather, how it does not function in Kinshasa. And honestly, I don't think that he embezzled all of that money himself, just like the names that I mentioned prior to him or before him. It is a system. But because you don't want to collapse the system, somebody has to take responsibility. And then there is a family dimension. The Belgian newspaper La Libre Belgique published credible investigation reporting on Tshisekedi's family's involvement in the mining sector in Katanga. On this show, I have talked about that, about who owns mines in the Katanga region, how the Republican force or the Republican Guard are now operating as private militia to the president's family, guarding mining or mines for the president, for his wife, for his brothers, sisters, and probably kids. I don't know. But it is a system that the family was able to take from the Kabilas, who took that same system or that same a system of looting the Congo from the Mobutus. 65 years of a country in the hands of three families. So those reports have mentioned Tshisekedi's mother, his wife, the first lady, so Maman Marthe, his wife, the first lady, in connection with business interests at the Eurasian Resource Group, ERG, one of the largest mining conglomerates operating in the DRC's mineral-rich Lualaba region. And these are matters under active judicial inquiry in Belgium. And then about the First Lady, don't get me started about how they hijacked Genocast, how they turned Genocast, genocide for economic gain, through the different institutions that they created into a profit. Instead of providing justice to the victims, instead of compensating the justice, the compensating the Congolese folks, the Congolese women and children, those who were raped, those who lost their loved ones, the kids that have no longer fathers or mother, instead of compensating them in the way that is dignified, they found no other way but to just, like Nicolas Kazadi said, distribute the money among themselves first and think about justice later. Think about reparation later. That was for Narev and other satellites, institutions that they created. Institution that they created, or organization that they created to get the settlement money from Uganda, who was sentenced to pay $360 million for the war crime they created in the Congo. Not just the war crime that they did in the Congo, but also the chaos that brought upon Congolese people, Congolese families. $360 million paid in settlements of $60 million. Go look up how much a victim has received. And I'm saying that because there are a few that I know that haven't received anything. And then there is a pay services affair, which really broke out early this year, January 2026. It is an American fintech company initiated, you know, an American fintech company initiated a legal proceeding in the United States here against the Congolese states early this year in March. They did that a couple months ago, demanding $4 billion, accusing the government of Kinshasa of contractual breaches and corruption related to a public institution. And not just regular public institution, I will add the public institution digitization projects. And the complaint is very explicit because it names the Minister of Portfolio, Minister Honorable Julie Mbui. I'm going to be really careful of using adjectives to qualify these people because, God forbid, I forget. Minister Julie Mbui Shiku. And crucially, she is the cousin of President Tshisekedi. So the complaint is explicitly accusing her of demanding a 10% kickback to release an initial $20 million payment. A 10% kickback from a public digitization contract, digitization contracts by the president cousin. That looks like a similar story that happened because my humble person is also the co-founder of New Young Congolese Scholar that was renamed New Young Scholar NYS, based in Bellevue, Washington. I remember the project that our co-founder, executive director, John Doc Campbell, wanted to build a school in Kinshasa. That project got canceled because it was a project in collaboration with Bellevue College, which is a legitimate college in Bellevue in Washington State. So we wanted to create a school, a secondary school in Kinshasa. It was in 2019, 2020, so you can imagine who was in power. I've said a lot of names already, but in that meeting, the president cabinet was present, so you can imagine who in terms of the faces, the big people were represented in that meeting. They were also asking for 10 to 15% kickbacks. And we pulled out. They say no. Our executive director said no. How can we justify 10% of whatever cost this project would cost us? We ended up building a school in Lumumbashi where there was no corruption, where we were not asked to pay anything because they understood that this school that we're building is for these children. So the World Bank here tells us that nearly 2/3 of the DRC, approximately 100 million people, live on less than $2.15 a day. And 80% of Congolese youth are unemployed. At least 84% live under extreme poverty. 84%. The DRC is like at the same time one of the richest countries on earth and one of the most desperate poor. The Congo is not poor. It's just simply mismanaged or poorly managed. And that combination, mineral wealth and the mass poverty, does not happen by accident. It is a product of a system. And that system under Tshisekedi, under President Tshisekedi, has not been reformed. It has been deepened. And I said at the start of this episode that tonight we are filing the indictment. The first count of that indictment is systemic, institutionalized, presidential level corruption that has consumed public resources on a scale that constitutes a crime against the Congolese people. So now some of you listening to this might say, Gaetan, you're being too hard, and every government in Africa deals with corruption. And what distinguishes this Tshisekedi? If you're asking yourself that question, and my answer is this: it is not only the corruption as staggering as it is, it is also what happens to the people who point it out. Jean-Marc Kaboun was once one of Tshisekedi's most important political allies. He played a crucial role in dismantling the Kabila Tshisekedi's coalition government. The arrangement that initially brought Felix to power, the African Compromise, the arrangement that Emmanuel Macron in Kinshasa told Tshisekedi, we know in what condition you came to power, let's not talk about that. When he broke with Tshisekedi, with President Tshisekedi, and became one of his critiques, he spent 30 months in prison. 30 months. On political charges so transparently motivated that they became an international embarrassment. Martin Fayulu, the man who almost certainly won the 2018 election, has faced ongoing political marginalization, harassment, and systematic exclusion from the political space. Critiques in civil society, journalists who dig into the mining sector, activists who document abuses by the FRDC in the East, they operate in a climate of intimidation, surveillance, and periodic detention. Former Prime Minister Matata Ponyo, who became an opposition figure, was sentenced to 10 years of forced labor by the Constitutional Court on, obviously, embezzlement charges. Now, Prime Minister Matata is not a saint. I'm not going to pretend like he is. And his conviction may have had merit, okay? But the selective nature of the prosecution here, why Matata, the prime minister at the time, but not Kazadi? Why Matata and not the members of the presidential family mentioned in the Belgian proceedings? And all of that reveals a justice system that is weaponized for political ends. Kabila himself, whatever his crimes, and I repeat, they are significant, recently accused Tshisekedi of state terrorism committed for a single purpose: power abuse of his own sake. So the man who built the system Tshisekedi inherited is now saying that the current president has weaponized institutions of the state against political opponents with, and it's important to mention that, a ferocity that even surpasses his own records. The irony. So when your predecessor, who rules with an iron hands for 18 years, calls you a dictator, something is deeply wrong with you. Because that was a low bar. Kabila was a low bar, right? If you have worked tirelessly in a political party like your dad did for 3 decades, and you have seen, you have struggled, you have fought against dictatorship, corruption, the invasion, injustice, and you can't even deliver on that, something is deeply wrong. And meanwhile, Tshisekedi's government has literally pursued a strategy of ethnic mobilization. And I'm gonna be really careful because I'm using that word intentionally, because that ethnic mobilization that we have seen under this president, this regime, is as reckless as it is dangerous. Because by casting the war in the East not as a geopolitical conflict fueled by Rwandan state aggression against the Congolese sovereignty, which is what is fundamentally, what it fundamentally is, a war of aggression, a war on Congolese people. But that war has been somehow turned into an ethnic conflict between Congolese communities. I'm saying that because the Congolese government went to Doha to negotiate with the M23, recognizing the legitimacy of whatever M23's grievances are, which is that they are fighting for the survival of an ethnic groups, the Tutsis. Forget about the 450 ethnic groups. And the regime has fueled attention that has spilled beyond the East, whether it's in Katanga, whether it is in Kinshasa, on the radio, trottoir, sidewalk in Kinshasa. Threats have been made, and I have heard some of those threats, some of those insults online, on X Spaces, made against people in the Katanga who perhaps have accumulated that frustration of seeing their province being plundered while they live in misery, while they live in poverty. The people from the East who live in the capital have also been insulted, have been arrested. We've seen a wave of arrest of officers who are Swahili speakers in Kinshasa, in Katanga. That is a fact. Simply for being perceived as either culturally affiliated with the conflict zone or perhaps close to former President Kabila. This is not the behavior of a leader who is building a nation. This is a behavior of a politician who is stoking identity division to maintain his grip on power. I remember by reading The Last Days of Mobutu, how he used the same tactics. Shout out to David Pendleton, who's listening to us from Italy. Free Congo forever. Yes. Shout out to Kalash Kolosori as well, because I see your comments. Whether it's on Instagram, on X, on YouTube, I see your comments. So the second count of indictment is the systematic suppression of political opposition and the weaponization of ethnic identity for partisan political gain. That's the second count of indictment. Because when it comes to the war, because ultimately for all the corruption and the suppression of dissent, Tshisekedi's most damaging failure, the one that has cost the most lives, displaced the most people, and done the most irreparable damage to the Congolese state, is his catastrophic military strategy in the Congo. Almost seems like he had none when he came to power. I keep asking people that in 2018, what was his plan? in 2023, what was his plan? Because when Tshisekedi came to power, M23 had been dormant for years. For years, defeated, depleted, removed from their funding. Because Rwanda was sanctioned by the United States using Public Law 109-456, Section 105. The leader of the M23 was arrested. They had all fled to neighborhood countries, 750 fighters to Uganda, allegedly. But then, as soon as he became president, as soon as he was declared president, the first thing that he did was to welcome them in Kinshasa for a secret talk for 14 days, everything paid for by the Congolese treasury, the same people accused of war crimes. And not only that, he met with the leaders of an organization accused later by the United Nations of funding the M23 during that period, 2019 and 2021, Mahou Peace Association. Tshisekedi met with them. There was a photo op. How do they have access to the president? That's another question, which is part of the indictment here. By 2022, that group, the M23, had been reconstituted and reframed by Rwanda, and the offensive that followed consumed North Kivu province with devastating speed. And Goma fell in January 2025, and we talked about that. We covered that. At least 3,000 bodies. Bukavu fell a couple months later. Cities of hundreds of thousands of people fell to a proxy force whose foreign backing has been documented by the United Nations, a group of experts in reports after reports that we have talked about in this show, maybe not explicitly, but at least on Friends of the Congo X space, Instagram posts, tweets. Now, to be fair, Tshisekedi faced a genuine formidable enemy. I must say, the Rwandan Defense Force is one of the most battle-hardened armies on the continent, and we all know why. We've talked about that because of the support that they get from the West. So M23 with the Rwandan support is not a ragtag militia like we've known, or like we've heard. It is a disciplined, well-equipped fighting force that defeated the South African forces, the United Nations forces, the FRDC forces, including mercenaries. And I do not underestimate the military challenge that the DRC was facing. But the response, guys, the response was a compendium of every military failure imaginable. Tshisekedi declared a state of siege in the affected provinces. I believe it was May 2021, maybe late 2021. But fine. But that state of siege has been renewed more than 60 times. I think it was 60 times, more than at least 60 times, without producing a single strategic reversal on the ground. What it did create was restrict the liberty of the people, the rights of the people on the ground. The life of the civilians were dramatically worsened. The liberty of the folks were worsened, were damaged, were impacted. It became not a tool of military governments, but a permanent suspension of civilian authority that gave cover for both military impunity and political manipulation. Because during the same time that they had those states of siege, we had reports of military officers used as, I would say, bodyguards and escort of wood and minerals being shipped to Kinshasa. shipped overseas. They cut trees. They need to, you know, somehow get out of the country. Then you have those military officers with official mission. Those minerals need to be secured. Those military officers didn't what they became bodyguards of minerals instead of protecting the people from an invasion. The FRDC, the armed force of the DRC, were deployed without adequate training, without adequate equipment, without adequate command structure into an environment that required precisely the opposite. And I remember that segment on TV5 where a new recruit was talking, but he was asking to be fed because he has been training and he hadn't eaten. Soldiers went months without pay. Soldiers sold their weapons to armed groups because they had no other way to survive. Soldiers deserted in mass. And that is not a critique of the Congolese soldier. I want to be clear about that. The individual men and women who put on that uniform and went to the East, it is not a critique of them. It is an indictment of the political leadership that sent them there unprepared and then abandoned them. How do I know they were abandoned? Because of the hiring of mercenaries, paid each at least $3,000. There was a BBC documentary about that. The Romanian and other Eastern European contractors, retired police officers, retired military officers from Eastern Europe, at significant cost to the Congolese treasury, $3,000 per person. Do you know how much a Congolese military was getting paid? Barely $100 a month before that shifted to $500. So Congolese soldiers went unpaid. When Congolese soldier go unpaid, that is what I said, the moral obscenity that has never been properly reckoned with. How do you treat your own people that way that will fight for your country? And then the use of the Wazalendo. Why not making them people in the army? Why creating a subgroup of folks that be frank is problematic? Why not having one army? Why relying on other armed groups to fight? Does it mean that when those armed groups, when those rebel groups, who, and I have to say, have committed war crimes on their own, and one of them is the FDLR, because if we are going to quote the United Nations reports to indict Paul Kagame, to indict the Rwandan Defense Force, if we are going to quote the United Nations or the United States to applaud the sanctions against the RDF, if we are going to quote or use those resources to ask more accountability for those who have brought chaos upon Congolese folks, I think it is fair to also quote them, because the same resources, the same sources are also saying that the FRDC or President Tshisekedi integrated the FDLR fighters. Whether it's a few of them, hundreds of them, but we need to be objective. We need to be just, because we cannot read one paragraph that accuses Paul Kagame and his army of invading the Congo and omits the second one that talks about the FDLR presence in the Congo. The Democratic Force for the Liberation of Rwanda, a group that includes individuals connected to the 1994 Rwandan genocide. mixed into the FRDC coalition was not only that was not only I believe that was a military disastrous strategy used by the president because he was the gift that kept on giving to Rwana's propaganda machine. Because when they go to Washington D.C. and sign on June 27 the agreement that talks about the presence of Rwandan Defense Force in the Congo as defensive measure, and the condition to lift that measure is the neutralization of the FDLR. It is right there, right there, right there. You are accepting the premise that you guys have been housing FDLR fighters. That is such a stupidity that I cannot understand. Whatever the operational logic, and I understand that in a guerrilla context, that you sometimes ally with whoever will fight, giving Rana the ability to say with even partial credibility that it is fighting genocide in Eastern Congo was stupid, was a strategic catastrophe. It ended Paul Kagame and Kigali's regime a moral argument they did not deserve, but were desperate to have. And then there are drone strikes. FRDC had been running an active drone campaign on territory it no longer controls. And what has that campaign produced? The killing of M23 spokesperson William Goma near Rubaya, which we covered in the previous episode. A military action of questionable strategic value, the killing of at least 22 civilians in Masisi in a drone strike that has been widely documented, the attack on a French humanitarian aid worker. And again, there was also some things that I have to mention about that. Why do we know by name that humanitarian workers, but we don't know the name of the other two? But I could say the same thing about when William Goma was killed in a drone strike. We know William Goma was killed, but we don't know the name of other folks. So I'm trying to be objective here. In the name of objectivity, if you did not order that drone strike, you would go ahead and say we did not do it. But that's not what the Congolese government is saying. The Congolese government is saying that we are following international law. We are engaging our enemies because we are in a wartime. This is wartime, and we are engaging our enemy following guidance of international law. The rule of engagement that we do not target civilians, we do not target UN workers because that constitutes itself a war crime. But that killing prompted France's own foreign ministry to make calls to Kinshasa, not to the M23 who controls that region. And keep in mind that when they wanted the airport of Goma to be reopened, they talked to the M23. They asked the M23 to reopen the airport of Goma for humanitarian purposes. But for that killing, they called Kinshasa, not M23, not Kigali, but Kinshasa, seeking clarification. Who fired the weapon? Who gave the order? And when France, one of the most diplomatically cautious nations on earth, calls your government to ask whether you ordered the strike, whether you killed that citizen, their citizen, she was a French citizen, the answer that France diplomacy's own communications contain is damning. How can you bomb a territory that you don't even control? Like when you look at the war happening in Iran, between Iran and the US, collateral damage is nothing for American because it's war. American people are not dying in those airstrikes. So they are going to willingly, and we don't care. We want to target that leader. It doesn't matter for them if Iranian civilians are dead, which is a war crime, if we have to follow the logic of international law. But in the logic of war, these are not our collateral damages, theirs. They are Iranian citizens. But how do you explain that as a Congolese responsible government, you are going to bomb territory that you do not control? Because even for drone strikes, and I mentioned that previously, you need human intelligence. You cannot constantly be flying over places in the drone. You have a limited time, limited fuel, limited range. You need intelligence to confirm the exact position of your target at the time that you are launching the attack. But you cannot trust that information because you're not there. You don't control that territory. And as a Congolese government, killing your own civilian in a war you are losing is irresponsible. Just like we've seen videos that I personally denounced of the FRDC bombing M22 position from a refugee camp, endangering the civilians, potentially killing the people, the aid workers that you claim to govern or protect. And that is not a war strategy, that is stupidity. This is a massacre conducted under the national flag, and I refuse to stand and shout Fachi Beton. And talking about the resources that was put in place to buy those hundreds of drones and new military equipment, where did all that military resources go? Where are all the billions in defense budgets increases? Because we've had one of the largest cities of North Kivu and South Kivu falling between in the hands of the M23/RDF. And the answer, according to every credible investigation, is of the DRC's defense procurement is the same place everything else in this government goes, into the private accounts of people connected to power. So the third count of indictment is gross criminal negligence in the conduct of the war, resulting in the deaths of Congolese civilians and the collapse of the state military capacity in the Congo. So we now arrive at what I think I consider the defining act of Tshisekedi's era. The one decision that will be debated by Congolese historians for generations. And when I say historian, I can not stop thinking about Maman Benedict Joko, salutes to you, who told me once that being an historian is a noble job. The one moments when the full architecture of this regime priorities was laid bare to the entire world to see. February 2025, Tshisekedi sent a letter, or at least he was a senator that did on his behalf, to Donald Trump, not to the African Union, not to the United Nations, not to the Congolese people, or have yet seen that letter in French or in Lingala or in Swahili or in Chiluba. That letter was sent to the Trump administration, to Donald Trump. And in that letter, he offered the United States access to the Congo's critical minerals, cobalt, copper, coltan, lithium, in exchange for American security backing against Rwanda. And let me be precise here. I want to be precise about the consequence or the sequence, because the sequence here matters. Because Tshisekedi did not first secure peace. He did not first secure a ceasefire. He did not first position the DRC from a place of strength after the military situation had stabilized to negotiate a fair deal. He went hand in hand to the most transactional administration in the American political history, an administration that has explicitly stated its foreign policy operates on the logic of what America gets, and that's the America First policy. And he offered the Congo's minerals wealth as the price of admission. Trump's own word at the signing ceremony in December 2025 tells you everything you need to know about the spirit of these negotiations. His exact statement about the deal was that everybody is going to make, I quote, a lot of money. Not that the Congolese people will be freed from exploitation, not that the DRC sovereignty will be protected, not that everybody was going to make a lot of money, but everybody involved in the signing of that deal was going to make a lot of money. So the political class in Kinshasa, the political class in Washington, D.C. Because I guarantee you, for those living here, your iPhone 17, 18 will still cost you what, $1,200 full price, $30 a month if you're doing a settlement, a payment plan. The Washington Accords signed on December 4th, 2025, have been praised in some, I would say, quarters as diplomatic achievement. And I want to be honest with you, if they produce a genuine, verifiable, enforced withdrawal of Rwandan force from the Congolese territory, that we have accomplished something no previous diplomatic process managed. But that is nothing. Look at the price. Look at what was exchanged. And the Congo still has no peace. The Strategic Partnership Agreement on Critical Minerals, which we analyzed, discussed in depth in previous episodes, is not a development partnership. It is a supply chain consolidation tool designed to serve American national security objectives. The agreement says itself so explicitly. It uses language of supply chain and national security objective in its own text. It establishes a strategic asset reserve. It locks the DRC mineral exports into US linked market pipeline, and embedded in it, carefully constructed, legally precise, is a mechanism that excludes aligned persons and excludes non-aligned person and covenation from participation. In plain language, countries like China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran are structurally excluded from the benefit of Congolese mineral partnership under this agreement. And what is shocking is that the Congolese people were not even asked about that decision. Now, some people would say, good, those countries or this country exploited the Congo for decades, or in the case of China, because we're talking about China. China controls, according to the World Bank, nearly 50% of DRC's cobalt production. The Chinese model, which is literally inherited from the Western model of exploiting the Congo, they are just better at doing business than Americans. They are better at bribing Americans than Americans. That Chinese model of minerals for infrastructure has produced infrastructure but not sovereignty. Why not diversify to the Americans is probably the question, and it is a reasonable question. And here's my answer. Because I asked the same question to a friend who once tweeted that he would rather die than to be, and I'm paraphrasing him, a slave to Kagame, to Rwanda. And I said, what about not being a slave to anyone? Why would you not be okay with being a slave to Rwanda, but you'll be okay to be a slave to America? Why would you condition your liberty or your freedom to one particular country? The US Constitution said all men are created equal. The Congolese Constitution also said the same. Most, I would say, all constitution in the world, at least in modern democracy, talks about equality and how it is important for people to be free. So I cannot comprehend why people want to trade one patron for another from a position of desperation in the middle of a war without any of the leverage that peace would have given you, that justice would have given you. Review after independent review of the Washington Accord makes essentially the same observation that Tshisekedi's regime entered these negotiations not as a sovereign state seeking development partnerships, but as a besieged government seeking a security protector. And besieged government do not get fair deal. There is this group. Let me just make sure that give me a second. So there is this group. I'm trying to see, can I share that? There is this group called ROAPE, and they are the review for African political economy. They published last month in February 2026 an analysis on the Congo, and they said directly that Congolese policy choices on resource governance, export routes, and foreign investment are now tightly linked to US geopolitical goals, leaving Kinshasa with limited room to cooperate with other partners. Right? So you cannot talk about sovereignty when you're not even given the room to decide who you want to do partnership with. And the imbalance of the agreement is not accidental. It is the price of US diplomatic protection. So, what does that mean in practice? It means that the DRC has essentially accepted terms in which the country's mineral wealth, the cobalt that powers your iPhone, the copper that electrifies American homes, the coltan in every semiconductor is now promised under treaty terms to serve American supply chains objectives. Before any Congolese child sees a clinic built from the revenue, before any Congolese teacher sees a salary paid from those royalties, before any Congolese woman in the Kivu has as clean water piped to their homes from the wealth that lies beneath her feet or their feet, the American interest will be the priority. And what did the Congolese people get in exchange? I think that's the question, the fundamental question we have been pondering, asking in these episodes of Congo Unfiltered, trying to dissect the deal, a peace deal that was violated within days of signing. M23 continued his offensive into South Kivu even after the Washington Accord was signed. And the city of Rivera fell like literally a couple days after the signature, the signing. The front line remain active. The ceasefire remains a document, not a reality. As the people of Goma, the people in Bukavu, if they're at peace. The ceasefire here has been constantly violated by both sides. And Congolese human rights lawyer and civil society organization were so alarmed by the terms of the minerals agreement that early this year, in January 2026, they brought the matter before the country's constitutional court, and we talked about that. And in Washington, D.C., February of the same month, there was like an inaugural critical minerals ministerial that was brought together by Washington, D.C. And we've seen delegation from many countries. I think it was about 50 countries, and the Congo was among them, to discuss how to strengthen American supply chains in the face of Chinese dominance. And that's critical to the course of our conversation, because on the sideline of that meeting, an MOU was signed between Glencore and the US-backed Orion Critical Minerals Consortium. And Glencore, one of the mining, I would say, multinational that has operated in the Congo for decades. That's who Glencore is. Accused of corruption with Dan Gertler. One of the companies whose history of the DRC or in the DRC is a study in how minerals wealth flows out of and poverty flows in. Our executive director in a meeting with all the coordinators said something very interesting today. He said that all the millionaires, all the billionaires are in the mining sector in the Congo. But interestingly enough, they're all foreigners. They're not Congolese. So the wealth flows out and the poverty flows in. That's the Congolese reality, that while people in suit sign papers in Washington and get rich or richer, real people in Goma, in Bunagana wait and wonder and hope to have access to decent water, to clean water, to have enough to buy food. So, ladies and gentlemen, people, the fourth count of indictment is the surrender of Congolese mineral sovereignty under condition of duress, without a mandate from the Congolese people, producing terms that serve American and multilateral corporate interests before Congolese ones. I know this has been a long episode, but listen, when you're being attacked on social media, when you're being insulted because you're telling the truth, you need to strike back with arguments. I don't do strawman arguments. I don't do invective. I don't insult. But I will bring you the receipts from the research that I've made, from the articles that I've read, the report that I've read, documentary that I've watched. So now we come to the argument that has cost me the most, I would say, the argument that has gotten me called a traitor. The argument that has made certain segment of our community want to silence this show, silence people like me. The argument that I'm going to make anyways, because it's Congo Unfiltered, because it is true, and because the Congolese people deserve someone willing to say it. President Félix Tshisekedi is not Paul Kagame. Let me be absolutely clear. Félix Tshisekedi is not Paul Kagame. I'm not saying they are the same person. I'm not saying that the crime are identical or that the external aggression Rwanda has inflicted on the Congo is equivalent to Kinshasa internal failures. I think these are different in kind, in scale, in legal category. The Rwandan military occupation of Eastern DRC, the eastern part of the DRC, its direction of M23, its theft of Congolese mineral through the smuggling network that the UN has documented exhaustively, this is an act of state aggression, and we have talked about it in this show. At France of the Congo, we have tirelessly condemned it. It is a war crime. I've said it, and I'll say it again. It is an ongoing violation of international law. Paul Kagame is responsible for the death of hundreds of, perhaps millions in Congo. And all these people dead, all these victims across nearly 3 decades of predatory invasion. So I'm not minimizing any of that. I'm not equating Tshisekedi's corruption with Kagame's mass atrocity. But what I'm saying is this, that they are both, in their own distinct ways, existential threats to the Congolese people's ability to determine their own destiny. And one of them has been allowed to hide behind the other. Kagame is the external predator. He is the wolf at the door. He's visible. We know what he's doing, and we know why. Nobody has an issue denouncing him. Not genuine people who care about the freedom of the Congo. He's exploiting the Congo's mineral wealth, suppressing a perceived security threat on its western flank, and maintaining the internal, I would say, legitimacy of his regime through the mythology of regional dominance. He's a predator. He's killing Rwandan people, his own people. He's killing Congolese people. Because that's what predators do. They behave like predators. Tshisekedi is something more inside this, I would say. He is the gatekeeper who left the door open. He is a commander who sent soldiers to the east without bullets, without pay, without a coherent plan. He is a president who went to Washington not to demand justice for the Congolese people, but to offer American corporations priority access to the Congolese resources. He is the leader who allowed a convicted felon to become Speaker of the Parliament. He is the man who welcomed Paul Kagame to the Martyr Stadium. He's the one who called him brother, even after he has been documented that at least 5.6 million people died between 1996 to 2003, as per the International Rescue Committee. Well before he even accessed to power, but he's still welcoming and called him brother. Can you imagine? Jewish people calling Hitler a brother during the Holocaust? Can you imagine that scene? Just imagine. You can't imagine that, right? He is the man whose cousin allegedly demanded kickbacks from a contract while the teacher of the Congo went unpaid. And he is dangerous precisely because he speaks the language of sovereignty. He says the word, he says the Congo's resources will benefit the Congolese people. That sovereignty will be protected, that dignity will not be sold. He says all of this with a straight face. And the Washington signing ceremony in December 2025, he said that the deal was a beginning of a new path. That peace will not just be a wish, but a turning point. He said that meanwhile on the ground in Goma, the international airport was closed. Bank operation has stopped under his command. Crime had surged, price had exploded, and residents told reported that they are still at war. The difference between Paul Kagame and Tshisekedi is not one of intent toward the Congolese people. It is one of method. Kagame takes from outside. Tshisekedi allows a taking from within. And when you're a Congolese person in the middle, when you're the woman in Masisi whose child was killed by the FRDC drone, when you're the teacher in Kinshasa who hasn't been paid in 3 months, when you are the miner in Katanga whose community will see none of the royalty from the minerals your family has mined for generations, or in Rubaya or in other places, it does not matter very much who the predator is, right? You steal the prey. You don't care if you're getting eaten by a wolf or by a tiger. You get eaten at the end of the day. And that is the argument. That is why I refuse to give Tshisekedi the protection of our silence. Because his survival in power is not the Congo survival. His political success is not the Congo success. And defending him from justice, from accountability, because Kagame exists, is exactly the logic that has allowed Congolese political elite to escape judgment for 3 decades. I would even argue for 65 years and counting. I want to spend a few minutes talking about something that goes beyond Félix Tshisekedi specifically, because Tshisekedi did not create the system. He inherited that system, deepened it, and made it its own, right? But the problem is structural here. The problem is the Kinshasa. It is the Kinshasa political class. There's a governing elite in Kinshasa drawn from across ethnic groups and across political formations, across the post Mobutu, post Kabila eras, that has collectively decided that the Congo's extraordinary wealth exists for the benefits, and that the country resources are a price, like a prize, I mean, that a prize to be bought, a prize to be fought over among themselves. And the only time they appeal to the people is when they need a crowd for a rally or votes for an election. They tend to manipulate anyways. We have seen this elite navigate Mobutu's decline, Kabila's pair assassination, Laurent Désiré Kabila, Kabila's son, extended overstay, 18 years in power, and Tshisekedi's managed transition and M23 reconstitution. And through all of it, the same fundamental reality has persisted. The people at the top have gotten richer, and at the bottom have gotten poorer. And for 3 decades, the eastern part has been burning. I've said it before and I will say it again until it is impossible to ignore. The Congo is considered too large and too rich to be governed by the Congolese people. That it is the operating assumption of every major external actor that has inserted itself into this country, from King Leopold II, robber, to the Belgian colonial administration, to the CIA role in Lumumba assassination, to the war in the 1990s, to the current mineral force security framework. The external assumption here is that Congolese leadership cannot be trusted with Congolese resources. And that is the sad truth, the truth that should make every one of us who cares about the Congo furious and resolved, is that a significant portion of the Congolese political class has internalized that assumption. They have made themselves the local partners of the extraction system. They have traded sovereignty for personal enrichment, national dignity for diplomatic access, the future of hundreds of million people for the current comfort of a few hundred families. So when Tshisekedi's special advisor is caught on video trading mineral access for personal bribes, that is not an aberration, I would say. That is a system functioning as designed. A system is perfectly designed to achieve the result it gets. When the finance minister embezzles funds and leaves the country through president's office, that is not failure of oversight. That is a system protecting itself. When convicted felon Vital Kamerhe becomes Speaker of the Parliament, that is not a political miscalculation. That is a system expressing its values. And when the head of the Senate, I forgot his name, alluded that the president shouldn't claim a third term, we see the same thing is about to be kicked out of the Senate. That is a system, again, expressing its values. And when the peace deal signed at the White House in December 2025 produces situation in which M23 advances continue, Congolese civilians die, and the primary tangible outcome so far is an MOU between the American Mining Consortium and a Swiss commodity trading giant. While the students of Goma wonder if peace is coming, that is not a diplomatic failure. That is a system delivering what the people were not expecting. That is a system delivering for the people it was actually designed to serve, not the Congolese people, the political class. Let it be in Rwanda, let it be in Congo, let it be in the US. And those people are not in Goma. They are not in Masisi. They are not in Bukavu, in Kinsangani. They are not the common people. They are the elites in Washington, in Paris, in Rwanda, in Zurich. And yes, in certain neighborhood in Kinshasa. Now, I want to be very careful here because this show is not about the business of despair. We did not cover the Congo to produce helplessness. We cover the Congo, and Friends of the Congo has been covering the Congo since 2004. We cover the Congo because we believe deeply, stubbornly, in defiance of every piece of evidence that argues otherwise, that the Congolese people deserve better, are capable of more, and that accountability, honestly pursued, is the beginning of change. So let me say what I believe the Congo actually needs. Not a diplomatic communique, not an investment framework, not a mining MOU. So what the Congo actually really needs. First, leadership that is accountable to the Congolese people. That's the whole point of a democracy. Not accountable to external patrons. This sounds obvious. It should be obvious, but it is not how the DRC political system currently operates. Every government since independence has ultimately been sustained not by the consent of the governed, but by the support of one external patrons and another in Belgium, then the United States through Mobutu, then a complex interplay of regional powers under Kabila's, and now the United States again under Tshisekedi. A government that owes its political survival to Washington will always, at the margin, serve Washington's interests before Kinshasa's. And that has to change. The mechanism for change is genuine democratic accountability. Elections that are actually free, actually fair, with results that are actually reflecting the will of the Congolese voters. The Congo has never had that, not once since the independence. So, second, a genuine anti corruption reckoning that does not stop at convenient political targets. The resources that have been stolen from the Congolese people over the last I would say what 6 years alone, the embezzled construction funds, the kickbacks, the family business interests in the mining sector, the fights between rebel groups that somehow make other people rich, the flight of former officials to comfortable European cities with public funds in their account. Again, this is not incidental to the Congo's poverty. It is a principal cause of it. The DRC has enough mineral wealth to finance universal primary education, universal healthcare, and basic infrastructure across the entire country many times over. The reason it doesn't is not a lack of resources. Again, I said the Congo is not poor, it is poorly managed. It is a drainage of problems, and the pipes drains into private accounts. So, third thing about what the Congo needs, what Congolese people needs, it is an honest reckoning with the military and human security situation in the eastern part of the country. That the Washington Accord may or may not produce a genuine ceasefire and a genuine Rwandan withdrawal. We will see. I don't know. If they do, that is again a geopolitical outcome worth acknowledging, and I will acknowledge that. I will be among the first to do it. But peace on paper is not peace on the ground. The people of North and South Kivu or Vituri of Tanganyika, they need just they don't need just a cessation of hostilities between armies. They need a political settlement that addresses the root cause of 3 decades of conflicts. Why do we have to take weapons to discuss our disagreements? And maybe because the government in Kinshasa doesn't even allow those who don't have weapons to speak. You see, if I was in the Congo, I would be arrested. I would probably be dead, and that's a fact. So, land tenure of and citizenship disputes, the governance vacuums in the East, the economic exclusion of communities from benefiting the resources extracted from the lands, and yes, the relationship between certain communities and the Congolese states. A relationship that has been abused by Rwanda for proxy purposes, but that also contains genuine grievance that Kinshasa has been cowardly and too dishonest to address. When everything is fine, there are Congolese. And the language they speak is a Congolese language. And I'm talking about the Tutsi and the Kinyarwanda. When we're in conflict, they're Rwandan. Because Tshisekedi, to his credit, said in 2020 that the Banyamulenge are Congolese. The Minister of Information, Patrick Muyaya, said that Kinyarwanda is the Congolese language. And when they said that, they were jeered for it. And I want to acknowledge the moment because it was a moment of, I would say, political courage. Probably not the time and not the way to do it, but still, saying words is not the same as building the legal and institutional architecture of citizenship belonging and right-based governance in the East. That architecture does not exist. And until it does, the grievances that Rwanda exploit will remain available for exploitation. We're going to have people who have no part of being Congolese suddenly named, appointed as high-ranking official in the army, appointed minister, appointed governor or vice governor. So fourth, the Congo must develop a vision for its mineral wealth that is centered on the Congolese people, not the American supply chain, not the Chinese refining system, not the European trading houses, the Congolese people. What will it look like if Katanga before it powers anyone else electric vehicle? What would it look like for the Colton of the North Kivu to finance the school and hospitals of North Kivu before it finances the semiconductor of the global electronics industry? These are not impossible questions. They are the questions that a sovereign government that actually serves its people would ask. They are the questions that the current government in Kinshasa has conspicuously refused to ask. Fifth, and finally, we, the diaspora, the civil society, the activists, the advocates, the friends of the Congo, we have to stop protecting leaders who don't deserve protection. We have to reclaim our role as the conscience of the Congolese people, not the cheerleaders of the Congolese political class. Why I was moved to join Friends of the Congo a few years ago is because of its mission to raise global consciousness. Because when we silence critiques of Tshisekedi because Rwanda exists, we are doing Tshisekedi's political work for him. When we call people traitors for demanding accountability, we are enforcing a silence that serves the powerful and betray the vulnerable. That's a fact. The Congo's liberation, genuine liberation, not the flag waving kind, but the kind where a woman in Masisi can name her president and know he works for her, will not come from Washington. It will not come from Kigali, and obviously, it will not come from the Brussels or Beijing or Paris, but it will come from the Congolese people holding the Congolese political class accountable. It will come from an internal reckoning that is at least as fierce as our external critique. That is, and that is essentially what this episode calls for. I want to close tonight by speaking directly to the people who call me traitor. People who said that they are going to personally attack me on social media, whether it is in person or on social media. I understand the reflex. I genuinely do. When the country is under attack, when the east part of the Congo, North Kivu, South Kivu is burning, when Rwanda's force occupy Congolese cities and the world barely notices, the instinct is to close ranks. The instinct is to say, now is not the time for internal critique. Now is not the time for division. Now is the time for solidarity. I understand that. I felt that pull myself in discussing with my brother, son of Congo, that I salute, Curtis. I felt that when discussing with Poncia, that I salute Poncia Niembo. I know what it is to love this country so much that its suffering feels personal, feels physical, feels like something you carry in your chest every single day. Francine Bouyou, a friend of mine that I salute, said 243, which is the code of the country, tattooed in our hearts. So we carry that feeling for the Congo every single day. But here's what I know after everything that I've seen, everything that I've studied, everything that I've read, advocated for in his space. The Congo has been burning for 30 years. And for 30 years, the argument has been that now is not the time for internal critique. Mobutu was protected by anti-Belgium sentiments. Kabila the father was protected by anti-Mobutu sentiments. Joseph Kabila the son was protected by anti-imperialist sentiment. And Tshisekedi is now protected by anti-Kagame sentiment. All while the Congo has been burning. If now is never the time, then the time never comes. And 100 million people continue to live in the richest poverty on earth, sitting atop of more minimum wealth than any nation should ever need, while the children go without schools, the mother go without clinics, the fathers go without work, and the soldier go without ammunition. I'm not a traitor. I'm someone who refuses to let love of country be weaponized into protection for those who are destroying it. This is part one because the indictment is filed. The case is open. The Congo deserves better. The Congo demands better. And so should you. This has been Congo Unfiltered. Thank you so much. And I will see you next week. Ciao.